Okay, so this morning I want to talk about how thoughts are everything. And this comes from the past few months of me really getting into my thoughts, journaling, meditating, and seeing the results of that. To start off with, I had a really rough month during the birth of my son. That whole month I was just really ruminating, and my thoughts were just circulating around the same question, around given the fact that I quit my job, how am I going to generate income, and it required me approaching making income in a new way, thinking about it in a new way, really letting myself just be okay with receiving based on my skills and gifts. And so given the fact that I had never really made income consistently and a good amount of income from just freelance work or my business, primarily my income was coming from a day job, which was a W-2. I had to, really surrender to the fact that I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna take this risk and see if I can really make it happen. So during that month of me being off, I was also waiting for my paid leave to arrive, waiting for it to get approved. And during that time, it was taking a long time, a few weeks. And so I was bouncing back and forth between these things, trying to figure out what I'm going to do to generate income. And so that's really where I got stressed out. I got sick. I was not in a good mood, not enjoying the birth of my son. And I think it was a month afterwards where I started to realize, okay, I really need to figure out a solution to this. How am I going to be okay with where I'm at? And so I would beat myself up a bit, given the fact that when I was in college, I had way more control. I had a lot more ingrained habits. I was meditating every day. I was working out every day. I was journaling almost every day. And so I kind of went back to that and started to really wanting to understand how important my thoughts are. Because I just knew that I was thinking the same thoughts every day, and I was needing to feel the same way every day. And so with that, I started to just journal my thoughts. And so through journaling, it's like I started to script my life. I started to enjoy this idea of just putting my thoughts on paper, not judging them, just really getting a sense of where I was at. It was a reflection of my inner state, and through that I could comprehend where I was at and then provide solutions to that. So just like in math, you show your work so that you can check your work and check your process and make sure that everything's good. It's the same thing with journaling. I started to basically check my work, check my thoughts, and see whether they were logical, whether they were connected, whether they were holistic, whether they were helpful, healthy. And through that, I started to develop this process of okay, how can I develop healthier thoughts? How can I develop more, logical thoughts, more connected thoughts, where one thought can relate to this circumstance of my life, and it could also, build some kind of continuation between the rest of my life. Sometimes there's thoughts that are contradictory, and so in working those things out, I was able to really gain a greater sense of control over my life. And I think that, and I do want to say that through this realization, most of the control that you have over your life comes from your ability to control your mind. And so I realized that a lot of times it wasn't the physical act of me doing something that would fix a problem. It was the way that I looked at it. And so one big thing could be, one big thing was, not trying to predict the future. So me having this problem with my job or income, really thinking about, okay, look, just because you're going to go into this doesn't mean you have to do it forever, right? So I knew I didn't want to go back to a regular W-2, and I'm not opposed to doing it again. I actually can now see kind of the pros and cons of it. But before I started journaling my thoughts, I wasn't able to see the pros and cons. It was just purely me thinking about, okay, how am I going to make this work? how long am I going to do it for? But what about all my other interests? And so the thing is that I'm realizing is like when you're in that state of just constant thought processing. It's not even processing, it's just thinking thoughts. You are not in control of that. You are letting your thoughts run through, and then they link up with other thoughts that are of similar nature, of similar energy, which continue to take you down this downward spiral. So one thing that I see often is like, because you're not writing it down and you're not trying to process it, you're letting yourself be carried away through it, which pushes you deeper and deeper into the hole. So coming back to my job, one thing that I started doing was I just started to look at it. I'm like, okay, this is the things that I was grateful for. This is kind of what I'm worried about. And through that, I realized, I was thinking too far ahead. I was thinking, as an all-in-one kind of deal. Another thing was that I wasn't communicating this to my partner. So she wasn't understanding why I was so stressed out through the day. And so that also led to me eventually, conversating, and then us developing a plan and really getting clear on how we wanted to generate income. And so it became this, this constant flow of communication rather than me trying to figure it out all on my own. And then also being able to just, have me be in constant interchange with my thoughts. It's like, okay, just because I'm not making income this month does not mean that I'm not going to make income the next month. And not everything has to fit this idea of what it's supposed to be. So like maybe I was thinking I need to make a certain amount, but in reality, when I sat down and looked at the numbers and looked at our savings and everything, I realized, okay, I don't really need to make that much. I just need to make enough to get through this month as we continue to expand and me develop more skills, me get better at my job, me get more clients, also my wife begin to transition into going back to work. And so like with the clarity came so much of the problem solving that I was looking for. And so like I said, it wasn't so much a physical act that I needed to do. I didn't need to grind more hours. I didn't need to go back to another job. Nothing needed to be done in the physical until the mental was resolved. And I think that's kind of the motto that I'm going with from now on. It's like everything is your thoughts. Your thoughts are reality. And so if my thoughts are not clearly understood, then I can't clearly navigate reality. Now I do want to talk about the importance of journaling and also meditation. Primarily journaling right now has become my number one habit that has just changed everything for me. Journaling, because with journaling I'm able to continue to lay out all my thought process. I'm able to process my thoughts, and I'm also able to clear my mind. Something interesting that I noticed is that everything that you interact with, if you don't process your experience through that, you don't complete the experience. And so there's this thought in meditation that it's the completion of an experience. A lot of times we go through something and we don't reflect on it, and not even reflecting on it, but we don't understand what it did to us, what it did to our body, what it did to our mind, what it did to our hearts, right? Like often, for example, we're consuming content and we just keep going and going and going, and so there's this ongoing open process, open loop that never gets closed. So I think about this as closing the loop. And I do like to play with the idea of computer programming here, as well as my experiences with psychedelics. I remember one time, it's very common to experience something where you keep thinking the same thing over and over when you're on a trip. And it's not until you realize that you are thinking the same thing over and over, and you acknowledge it, that you're able to break out of the cycle. And with computer programming, the loop will keep going and going and going. If you never, for example, wrote a condition that made sense for it to stop, or if you never, or if you wrote some bad code that made it just continue to go and go and go. So that's the thing. It's like you have to check in on yourself develop systems in your mind that help you allow for all the data to flow more clearly, flow more intelligently. So the completion of the experience is really the ability to complete thought and understand what to do next. The open loops that we have in our lives are stopping us from progressing. So for example, maybe you think that somebody is annoying, or maybe you think that somebody is being rude to you, and then you go home and you keep thinking that, and then you keep thinking why, and you think, what can you do? Instead of sitting with it and being like, okay, is this person truly rude? What makes them rude? How does that make me feel? Let me feel that feeling that's coming up and really sit in it and like understand it. Okay, now that I experienced it, now what would my body like me to do, right? And so it's this process that your body is constantly showing you what it wants from you. This is where the work of Carl Jung helps out a lot also, just the shadow for sure, also projection, also archetypes. So all these things are important because they serve as guides to understand your inner world. And so when you wake up and realize these thoughts, you wake up to your thoughts, you do gain a lot of control. I do want to say that the answers come by themselves also. When you're able to recognize how you feel, you can immediately tell kind of what you want to do. Your body will tell you what you need to do. There's no judgment around it. I recently talked to my mom. She hit me up because she was struggling with some thoughts. She felt a certain way about a situation, but she was questioning whether she was in the right, whether she was in the wrong, whether maybe she was thinking or whether the way she was thinking was too outdated, or not relevant to the situation. And through deeper thought and deeper reasoning, I helped her walk through it. She understood that no, her thoughts did make sense, her feelings did make sense. She understood why they made sense. And then through that, she kind of understood, she processed it and understood kind of what she needed to do next. And so that's what happens often with a lot of people. It's like you sit in this state of, I don't know if I should feel this way, but I'm feeling it, but I don't want to feel it completely. And so it's this incomplete loop that continues to circulate around people. And so the more uncertain or unclear or incomplete you are, the more life becomes that way, where you don't get what you want, you don't feel the way you want to, and you just don't enjoy your life. So this is why, it's kind of it like ties so much into the law of attraction, where if you are incomplete, you never really are clear, and so you never do get what you want. For me, the manifestations that I have asked for have come by to me pretty quickly. Just throughout the days, because of the fact that I'm clear, there's no doubt about the things that I'm wanting. The things that I want to do in a moment are much clearer. I can communicate more clearly to my wife. When I am upset, I can communicate that more quickly, which just leads to an even greater ability to communicate and create my reality. So I would like to go deeper into this, but I just want to put this out there for people to hopefully benefit from, and I hope to be able to post more. That's it. Stay lucid, guys. Peace.